Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Desi Gradinarvo and I'm Historic Environment Lead at the National Academy for Social Prescribing and also a Senior Policy Advisor on Wellbeing at Historic England. We're delighted to host another of the Thriving Communities Program's webinars. This time the webinar will focus on heritage and how we can use our engagement with the historic environment to improve our well-being. Unlike other sectors such as physical activity or natural environment, heritage doesn't always get associated with well-being and health, despite the obvious benefits for our physical and mental well-being derived from connecting with local and national heritage. We would like to share with you some of the evidence and some of the practical experience of colleagues who have worked in that area and are developing some great ideas and projects using the interaction of heritage and well-being. Many of those can or even have been used successfully for social prescribing, and we hope that you may find inspiration in applying similar approaches in your work. We will be interested and keen to take questions at the end as well. And if there isn't a time to reply to all of these questions, you'll be very welcome to email me any additional questions, ideas, and comments. My colleague Zoe will share in the chat my email address with you. I will endeavor to get back to all of you after the webinar. Please note, we'll be recording this webinar as well, and it will be available afterwards as a recording on NASP's website if you want to get back to it or to share the link with colleagues. So today we will be hearing from Dr. Linda Monckton, Head of Wellbeing and Inclusion Strategy at Historic England, who will talk about the relation between heritage and wellbeing and what Historic England are doing to make the case and promote the benefits of engaging with the historic environment. After that, we'll hear from Helen Schön, who leads a consultancy in arts, heritage, health and wellbeing, and who will tell us about a very exciting new heritage, health and wellbeing program that has been developing within one of the heritage action zones supported by Historic England in Kirkham in the Northwest. And then we'll hear from Jane Brooke, fundraising manager at East Kent Mencap, who will share with us her experience of setting up and carrying out several wellbeing projects in Ramsgate and the area, which successfully used the engagement of local people with their local heritage and historic environment. All these are really interesting and very exciting projects for us. And I hope that you will all find something useful and intriguing to take away and apply in your work going forward. So in a little break, we'll go and start the conversation with Dr. Linda Monckton. So see you in a little bit.
Morning, everyone. I was going to say morning, it may even be afternoon. So hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us. As Desi said, I work at Historic England as Head of Wellbeing and Inclusion Strategy, and I've got about 10 minutes to cover the entire topic of heritage and wellbeing, which is something of a challenge. So what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes, actually, if I just move straight to the next slide, that would be great. I'm going to talk about what we mean by heritage and the historic environment. There should be one before that, actually. Is there one before that? Don't worry. I'm going to talk about what we mean by heritage and historic environment and who we are as an organisation for the first half. And then for this sort of slightly longer second half of my my short talk, I'm going to talk about what we're up to as an organisation and how wellbeing and heritage seem to work together based on the evidence that we have to date. So mine will be a general introduction, talking about a kind of framework for how we think about heritage and wellbeing. And then we will move on to talk to Helen and Jane about some more specific projects that that are being developed that hopefully will give you, as Desi said, some sort of brilliant ideas as well. Okay, so what do we mean by heritage? I think it is really important to start with definitions sometimes, and I think this matters because we talk a lot about culture, but it's such a broad term. And I have seen considerable evidence that different people and organisations understand its meaning and scope in completely different ways. So just so that we're all starting on the same page. So at its broadest, when I'm talking about heritage, I'm just talking about something which is an inheritance, essentially. So we can therefore talk about our cultural heritage, as shown on the screen, as anything that we have inherited from the past. And that can be, as far as historic England is concerned, very recent or very distant past, that people value as a reflection and expression of knowledge, belief, traditions of themselves or others. I think it's worth noting in this definition from Conservation Principles from English Heritage, which was our predecessor organisation, that this is a evolving belief, that the word evolving is really important. Therefore, heritage can be specific to an individual and it may change over time. Arguably, this is much like the equally broad concept of well-being, specific to an individual and will change over time. In my mind, this makes their partnership especially fruitful. Next slide, please. The historic environment, therefore, is an element of this cultural heritage resource. It is essentially the material culture, the surviving physical remains of anything land or sea-based. As you will see here, this can include landscapes, managed plantations, buried or standing buildings or artefacts. I like to think of it in a technical sense as stuff that you can probably see, stuff that you might be able to discover. And this is about the impact that people have had on places. So much of the landscape that we walk through our countryside is a product of our own influence on that landscape and can tell us something about who we were. I think this relationship is very valuable for many reasons, but I think it's really important to make a couple of points here that I hope will be of relevance to you. So the historic environment's significance in the context of well-being is the quality of the places in which we live does actually make a difference to how we feel. How we share in aspects of those places brings us together, and the subsequent examples will be really good examples of that for you. But also there's an important added dimension, which is what we learn from understanding how people in the past have used a place or developed themselves and their communities tells us about who we are and why the world looks like it does now. And this includes our own attitudes to health and well-being and what it can tell us about how we led to the point that we're at now in terms of what is well-being, what does it mean to us as a set of people, as a set of communities. Next slide, please. Right, so just many of you may know who Historic England is and many of you may not have had the pleasure. So just to make sure, again, everybody's on a kind of level playing field, where do we fit into all of this? So Historic England, we used to be known as English Heritage a few years ago, but we're now Historic England. English Heritage is a curatorial body. We are the body that advises the government on the historic environment. We advise both locally and nationally on conservation techniques, on planning applications, on listed building consents. We give research and repair grants. We produce advice and guidance. We develop skills. We work with schools. We advise on which buildings should be listed and maintain that list, which is known as the National Heritage List for England. We work in partnership with local communities and authorities in particular priority places known as Heritage Action Zones, and Helen will talk in much more depth about those later. But these tend to be place-based regeneration initiatives, and I will actually mention these later as well. And we also form strategic partnerships at a national level, such as the one between Historic England and NASP, which is this webinar is the product of that relationship. And NASP and Historic England are both working collectively towards improving the lives of people, but we are improving the lives of people through the historic environment as best we can. So that is roughly what we're doing. So next slide, please. Right, so at the moment we're developing a wellbeing and heritage strategy that will provide a framework for how we as an organisation operate in this expanding and important field and help us design projects with wellbeing in mind from the outset. This will go to public consultation in autumn of this year, hopefully, so there'll be an opportunity for everybody to comment on that. We are also developing new models of working. So this map shows the locations of our heritage action zones, these place-based partnership programmes that run for about 5 years each. The ones in red, if you can see those as distinguished from the ones in blue, are ones that are specific to high streets. And all of these high street heritage action zones have a funded cultural element to them. In Kirkham in Lancashire, that Helen will talk about, we're working on a cultural consortium to develop a complete health and wellbeing programme using social prescribing, local community groups, GPs, the local history of the area and the surviving historic environment, along with the traditions of the place. Next slide, please. I'm not going to talk about what's on this slide particularly. These are some links that we will make available to you that you can go to look up more evidence of some of the material that says why heritage matters and how it's been used in the past. But I thought it was important to flag up some of the other resources that you can use that I don't have time to discuss. Next slide, please. I think there are two important ways to think about the importance of the historic environment. One, as I've mentioned, is the quality of the local place, how people feel about where they live. Again, these slides will be available to you afterwards, so you can review the text then. Next slide, please. But I think of particular relevance to today is this idea about how we then engage with our heritage and historic environment, and how the historic environment itself can help with that engagement process. Next slide, please. So how does heritage and wellbeing work? So in the last few remaining minutes, I'm just going to suggest this framework that we developed in 2018, that based on the evidence of all the projects that we could find, there seem to be 6 key ways in which the historic environment related directly to heritage. And I'm just going to whiz through these now. So this little framework diagram will appear on the next slide, so don't panic if you haven't read it all yet. So next slide, please. So the first one is heritage as a process. So the image on the top left. This means something to do with volunteering. You'll all be familiar with this. It could be surveying a site, it could be recording something, it could be contributing towards the National Heritage List for England through a project called Enriching the List that Jane is going to talk to you about later. It could be that heritage is about participating in a site, visiting a site, the middle image here, visiting a site with a group. It could be part of a rambling association or part of a civic trust, but the point is about engaging with a place of significance. It could be about something more therapeutic, so the historic environment as healing, where a project is designed to meet an individual need and build confidence and resilience, or enable people to see how they fit into the broader perspective of community through time. Next slide, please. It can be something which we've here called a mechanism or a tool for bringing people together and sharing. So the top left slide image here just illustrates that in a general way. So through a common or shared cultural tradition in a historic place, you can bring people together to get to know each other in a new and interesting way. It can simply be about where we are. Where is it that we live? Where we may sit, as this small child does, and observe an amazing and beautiful scene in front of her. What do we see? How do we feel? How can we creatively reflect that in a way that supports our well-being? Or even how can we do this with archive material of a place as we unravel its history and our place in it, remembering and learning afresh? Or it can be about our environment, the great outdoors, formed in the most part by, as I say, the interaction of man on our planet. How do we feel as we walk through a landscape or park? And what is our interaction with why it was created, what it was meant to do, and how it is used now? And all of this is a basis for how we can best use it in the future. So that's a really rapid summary of a very complex issue, but I hope it at least gives a framework to the talks that are going to come later. And just before I end, what we'd really appreciate is if you could take part in a single question poll. And what we want to do is ask you what you think would help you most as people working in the field in terms of the kind of advice and guidance that a historic environment body like Historic England can give. So if you're able to, when the poll appears on your screens, if you're able to select the things that you think would be the 3 most important for you, what would help you most, we will simply use this anonymised data to help create some priorities for us so that we know what we can deliver most effectively, fastest for the people that need it. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to our webinar on heritage and social prescribing. I'm very pleased to introduce our second guest today. This is Helen Schoen, who is the head of Helen Schoen Associates, consultancy in arts, heritage, health and well-being. which is currently working on developing a very unique pilot program on heritage health and well-being at Kirkham as part of the existing Heritage Action Zone there. It's all very new and innovative, and we're very excited to see how it will shape up. My colleague Linda Moncton already explained what the HAZs, as we call them, Heritage Action Zones are, but I just wanted to add that there are also more than 60 high street heritage action zones in the country, which are targeting specifically high street areas in towns and places where there's more need and most potential for regeneration. Those high street houses have received additional funding, including from the Heritage Lottery Fund, to develop cultural programs which are looking to engage the local communities with their history and heritage in support of the renovation and the regeneration of these places. So I'll ask my colleague Zoe to drop the links to the Heritage Action Zones and High Street Heritage Action Zones web pages here, in case people are interested to find out more about these schemes generally. And there's also a map that Linda showed you, which you can see if there is one of these zones in your area. So the Kirkham Heritage Action Zone is one of our shiniest examples, I would say, so far, as it is one of the areas where our local partners have been most interested and keen to incorporate well-being in all their strands of work and to ensure that any aspect of the regeneration program will be delivering those well-being benefits for the people in Kirkham. So this is where Helen's work comes in, and I will get over to you now, Helen, if I may. Hello and welcome. It's great to have you here with us today. So over to you to tell us about the Kirkham Heritage Action Zones program and how your well-being and social prescribing feasibility study fits into it.
Thank you, Desi and Linda. Thank you for inviting me, and hello everyone. So I'm delighted to share some highlights from the feasibility study I'm undertaking with my colleague Ferry van Dijk of FVD Consulting, looking at the potential of heritage and wellbeing projects in this historic market town of Kirkham in the Fylde district of Lancashire, and create a practical and costed model for the delivery of heritage and wellbeing interventions in Kirkham, including social prescribing. As already said, the Heritage and Health and Wellbeing programme in Kirkham is part of the larger HAS programme funded by Historic England, and this is managed by Andrew Chatterjee from the council, and I'll explain more of this shortly. The overall objective of this Heritage Health and Wellbeing programme is improving local people's health and wellbeing using Kirkham's social and cultural assets, including repurposed heritage-based community assets. We are halfway through this 4-month study, consulting with stakeholders such as the CCG, Public Health and Lancashire County Museums, reviewing the literature, mapping the assets and creating a list of possible activities to synergise with the overall programme. Addressing the wider determinants of health are important in the Fylde district, which has a larger, older population, a resident self-reporting with limiting long-term illness and disability. Mobility, social connectedness and good mental health are important priorities. We found there is general support and appetite for this programme and desire to rebuild community and improve confidence and wellbeing post-COVID. Next slide, please. So here we have the historic market town Kirkham in Fylde, Lancashire, and it also has received funding from the government's Future High Streets Fund to revitalise and regenerate its high street as well. So it's a fantastic opportunity, as recently seen in the publication Lancaster Post. So the overall focus over the 4 years is changing perceptions of heritage and high streets, supporting sustainable economic and cultural growth on and around high streets, and restoring and enhancing local historic character. The vision to revitalise the historic streets and Market Square, restoring and repurposing key buildings with new uses, such as the really exciting development of a heritage and eco-skills centre called Hillside, and an arts and heritage centre with a community cinema, and also improving the visual appearance of the shops and streets, introducing new and more diverse uses such as residential skills, employment and training, new leisure and restaurants to encourage more diverse offer and enhanced evening economy, and placemaking, high quality urban design enhancements to public realm, making the centre more attractive to families, shoppers and visitors. With all of this in mind, we are proposing 4 overarching heritage and wellbeing themes with activities to work on this year in Kirkham to provide pilots, tasters, promote and engage the community in the heritage and wellbeing programme. Next slide, please. So the first one is sustainable textiles, as we call it. This theme is responding to the heritage of industrial textile production in Lancashire. Kirkham had several textile mills and was known for its production of cotton, and it has even an old loom undercover in the town. We would like to commission, for example, the Heritage and Dance Company About Time to perform their cotton piece, and this would involve people in the workshop, dance workshop too, and this could lead on to a fuller programme. Dance classes, we noticed, are very popular in Kirkham in the community centre. We'd also be able to engage heritage talks provided by Lancashire County Museum. And then for the future, in the panel on the right, I've listed a few examples of research and practice in textiles, which is very exciting. And some of you may know the name of Patrick Grant from the Sewing Bee TV programme and his work with a consortium looking at sustainable textiles and including growing flax in Lancashire. So we'd love to be able to contact them. Sheila Byrne, the social prescriber for the area, tells me she's had lots of interest in crafts and textile groups in her referrals. And there could be potential, for example, in intergenerational projects of teaching textile skills, for example. So next slide, please. This one is on life stories and memories and links with the talking around place and identity and belonging. So this would build on the connections and collaborations we have with, for example, Green Close Arts Organisation and Sue Flowers, who is providing creative consultation for our feasibility study. And for example, life story work, I know, is very recommended with working with people living with dementia, for example, so the sort of reminiscence sort of arts. And also Kirkham, as mentioned, with a culture programme, also funded by Historic England for the High Street. Helen Just is leading on this Kirkham Treasures programme with life stories, asking people to contribute. And so this is an opportunity to connect with that and to look at traditions and families and people and the town. And again, on the right, in the grey panel are some examples, some inspirations. One Doctor that we came across, and also one that's been mentioned in the Heritage Action Alliance report on wellbeing, looking at Worcester life stories. So these are sort of inspiration for us. So next slide, please. So the theme of healthy living and food builds on a number of needs and assets, being active and healthy eating to help address concerns such as obesity and diabetes, and also the opportunity for shared learning from other projects in the county. Public health colleagues Amanda Spaven and Laura Warden have been so helpful, providing us with lots of great examples of social prescribing and community health projects in Lancashire. This one on cookery is something we can borrow, getting our ideas of recipes. And the Nature and Heritage Trail would use an existing pathway connecting to one of the GP practices in the town to the new building where 2 GP practices are going to be in Wetham. And we can also share learning from the development of the heritage trails and digital access that colleagues in Fleetwood in Lancashire are doing with their Heritage Action Zone as well. So I think examples of kind of shared learning is quite important in this study. Next slide, please. So this one is, as I've mentioned, the Hillside, the fantastic Heritage and Eco Skills Centre being developed, and it's they're looking at a sustainable business model. So we were thinking we could hold public open days and look at talks and workshops, but it's also important to look at how training and educational partnerships link, such as men's sheds and shedders, which are well known, but also the opportunity for Recovery College, which are attached to mental health trusts. So as I mentioned, Sue Flowers is working with us, and she's part of a thriving communities social prescribing project in Lancashire called Phoenix Rising, with the Lancashire and South Cumbria NHS Trust Recovery College and others, and we're hoping to meet with them soon. So I'm kind of quite excited about the potential of linking in with another part of the infrastructure of Recovery College. plus looking at volunteering and time banking could be part of this. And then also to kind of acknowledge the interest in programs like BBC's Repair Shop and looking at the kind of voluntary arts and crafts association that are places, networks to connect with. Next slide, please. So to recap, we're looking at 5 ways of wellbeing and the Historic England model, as Linda has described, and we'd be able to look at how those activities can kind of respond to the opportunities for volunteering, participation, sharing, therapeutic activities, belonging and experiencing, and then how to evaluate this. And then for our final slide, next slide please. So in our feasibility study, Ferry and I are looking at a whole town approach. This community spirit tool by the Royal Society for Public Health has been a useful reference, and looking at how we can involve the community and looking at the programme as a catalyst looking to the future. There's potential for economic development and skills acquisition which is needed. We have heard that a number of referrals for social prescribing have been with people, many in their 50s and 60s, who've lost jobs recently due to the pandemic. There are assets to build on, but we think it would be very helpful to appoint a dedicated heritage link worker to support the fairly new social prescribing infrastructure. There's only one link worker currently for a big area. And then we would look at an academic research partner to evaluate this project. Thank you, and that's my final slide. Thank you, Daisy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Helen. This has been truly fascinating. I'm honestly so excited to see how this program will pan out and start taking shape at Kirkham. I hope many other local authorities and places will adopt some of these ideas and approaches in the future. So we'll continue the conversation with our third guest after a very short break. So see you all then, and thank you. Hi everyone. I would like now to go to our third guest today, Jane Brooke, fundraising manager at East Kent Mencap, who have been a very good partner to Historic England on many occasions, and who is doing some truly inspirational work in Ramsgate over the years. Welcome, Jane. It's great to have you here today. Just before I let you tell us more about your work, Jane, it will be probably useful for our viewers to know what enriching the list is, not only because it's a great opportunity for anyone to engage with their local heritage really for no cost whatsoever, but also because it was incorporated in one of the wellbeing projects that you will talk about in a bit. So first of all, just to say there's a thing called the National Heritage List for England, where Historic England keeps all the records for listed buildings, scheduled monuments, protected wreck sites, historic park and gardens, battlefields and World Heritage Sites. Anyone can search the NHLE as it is known on our website, see if there are any of these listed or registered sites near you and find out more about them. Many of those listings, however, are old, limited in its range and depth of data and need updating. So since 2015 onwards, we introduced the tool or initiative called Enriching the List, where we invited the public, literally anyone who is interested, to add their own knowledge, data, and contributions to the list by uploading pictures, information, or memories to the existing listings of listed buildings or other heritage assets on the NHLE. This initiative has been extremely popular and has helped us grow and diversify the list and our public engagement, and is now successfully used in many heritage projects, from heritage schools to local community and volunteering projects. We sincerely believe that it's an excellent tool to help people learn more about the special places in their neighborhoods, but equally to connect more with the history and heritage of the places they live in and feel that they contribute, that their views and input makes a difference and strengthens their feelings of belonging and meaning. If you want to check it out yourselves, I will give the link to the Enriching the List webpage here too. Thanks, Zoe. And now I will let Jane tell you more about how they used Enriching the List in one of East Kent MenCap's projects in 2018. Jane, please tell us a little bit about East Kent MenCap first and how you got involved in heritage.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me today. So East Kent MenCap provides opportunities for adults and children with a learning disability, their families and carers, enabling them to achieve the things they want out of life and to be valued, treated equally, listened to and included. We were established in 1948. We're affiliated to Royal MenCap, but we are an autonomous organisation. And just to sort of put it into context, we have a turnover of just over 2 million, 120 staff, and we offer housing, community and domiciliary services, day resources, social activities and information. And last year, throughout the pandemic, we provided a critical service as well as running virtual activities and events. And last year we reached just over 1,000 people with a learning disability and their families. So we got involved in heritage by chance. In 2018, we purchased a listed building from Thanet District Council in Ramsgate through the community asset transfer. We chose it purely for the location and its potential to increase our services, and being listed was actually incidental. So it was important for us that people who use our services are fully invested in the new building, which when we purchased it was badly run down. That picture's been touched up, it's a lot grottier than that actually. So we ran a series of consultations to find out their hopes for the new site. And my role as the fundraising manager was to secure funding to support this intention with different and exciting ways for people to engage. So given that we now owned a listed building, I suddenly looked at the opportunities for heritage as well. And obviously health and well-being of people with learning disabilities is an absolute key, something key to what we want to achieve.
So what was the feedback from the project in Ramsgate, Jane? What did the participants say about their experience specifically?
Okay, now the next slide, please. So when we bought the building, it coincided with Ramsgate becoming a heritage action zone. And I went along to a meeting where they launched the action zone to the local community, and there was a representative from Historic England there, and she'd mentioned about enrich the list. And I really immediately saw the possibilities because we have a very popular photography group at East Kent MenCap. They put me in touch with one of their staff, Gareth, and who offered to run a session and come along to Ramsgate and run a session. He spoke to the support worker who runs the photography group, and they set up a date. He sent me information about how we get onto it. So from our point of view, integration with the local community, being part of the community, is really key objective for East Kent MenCap. So being the opportunity to be part of a national initiative was very attractive to us. It meant that our photography group could see their work on a website, and working with other groups all over the country, which really gave them validation as a photography group. So the feedback, it really helped them to own the building and appreciate its legacy. Even though it's a really old building, it was built in 1813, I don't think anybody really thought about its history until then, and that we're actually the current custodians of something that's been used by the community for over 200 years. Our address is literally, we're in Meeting Street. So it suggests that that's always been a place for the community to come together. And having an expert, Gareth, to come along and talk about enriching the list and how our photography group could contribute to that, gave them a lot of pride in their photography skills, and it helped them to look at the building in a different way. And obviously they were very thrilled to get these lovely branded materials that you can see to the photography group displaying on that photograph. And again, it made them feel part of a national initiative and something that was for everybody, which was really important. At one point, so we're gradually restoring the building and improving it. And so members can record that and record the changes and improvements. Sadly, of course, there's been a big gap during the pandemic. We're hoping to start that again very soon. So at one point, a large piece of wood fell off the facade during a storm, revealing an inscription on the building underneath. So it was quite exciting for the photography group to come and capture that and compare what had happened.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Jane. There's some fantastic pictures that you share with us today. And maybe it will be fair to say that this was probably the beginning for you in terms of working with heritage and well-being. I know that you have grown further since and developed new ideas and projects, implementing all that you have learned along the way. So can you tell us a little bit about your other projects involving heritage?
Sure, we'll have the next slide, please. So following this project, we were contacted by Citizen, which is a coastal and intertidal zone archaeological network. And they were doing a project to highlight the threat of coastal erosion to a wealth of foreshore and intertidal sites. And they were working in our area. And they invited our photography group to visit the old hoverport in Ramsgate to photograph it, to collate an exhibition at a local gallery. So what was lovely was that having worked with Gareth from Historic England, the photography group kind of were really got quite excited about historical and heritage. It might have been quite off-putting terms before. So Lara from Citizen spent a very wet, so she can see very wet afternoon with the group, taking photographs. And then she helped them to curate an exhibition at a local gallery where they were able to bring their friends and family to show them their work and read comments in the visitors book. Again, sadly, this work was interrupted by the pandemic, but we are hoping to pick it up, and the photography group want to go back and then take photographs during different seasons to see how it changes. And it really sparked an interest in heritage, I think. And so we're now, once again, we were looking at before the pandemic, we're going to pick it up. We're now looking at working with Historic England and the Heritage Action Zone to explore the heritage of our building, right back to when it was built in the beginning of the 19th century. And we want to involve many more members of people with learning disabilities and the wider community to run integrated activities led by artists to create artworks that tell the story of what we discover about the building and its role in the local community.
Oh, thank you, Jane. This has been truly inspirational and uplifting, I found. And actually, I find that the best output and result of all our work is when we actually see communities and people using and applying all these ideas and tools in practice and enjoying doing it, as we've seen from what you shared with us. I can see how much these projects actually gave to the local community there in Ramsgate. And it just proves that heritage is such an invaluable pool of opportunities in each town and village to help people come together and find strength and meaning in the legacy of the past in these places. More reasons to make them, if you want, all care for each other and enjoy their lives in the communities where they live. Just before we open the floor for questions, I would also like to say that this is why we think that activities of this sort are so perfect to be utilized for social prescribing. Studies have shown that in the last 12 months, people have actually connected even more with their local heritage as part of everyday walks that they have been taking in their neighborhoods and villages, which led to heightened appreciation of their local natural and historic environments. We really think that we should build on that increased interest and help people reap even more benefits from engaging with the heritage around them. This is something we're trying to promote through our collaboration with the other sectors as well. My work specifically with NASP is an effort in this particular direction, because the environment is one thing really, and it encompasses the historic, the natural, the cultural environment. So we should engage with all its aspects when we're out and about. And as human beings, we need all these aspects of our mind and body to be fully activated and nourished. And our heritage and history, I think, is an intrinsic part of that. We are very hopeful that local authorities and link workers across the country will be open to explore more and more opportunities to link the provision of heritage organizations and heritage projects of a variety of other partners to social prescribing referral pathways. At NASP, we're working to develop these linkages and connections, and at Historic England, we'll be working in collaboration with the wider heritage sector to raise awareness about well-being and social prescribing so that these provisions multiply and diversify across the country. Thanks again so much, Jane, and I hope that this was of interest to all of you. We're now very happy to take some of the questions that you may have had to myself or any of the speakers today. So see you all in a little bit in our Q&A session. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Just before we start replying to some of the questions that you posted in the chat, I just want to give Jane another chance to actually reply to one of the questions that I was really keen to ask her, and that was, what is your view, Jane, specifically on heritage and well-being, and what will you recommend that people do to incorporate heritage in their well-being and social prescribing activities?
Thanks, Desi. Yes, just very briefly. I mean, I think the point was that for a lot of minority groups, like people with a learning disability, they don't often have much of a sense of history and heritage. They don't really see it in sort of books, images, or stories on history. And often they move around a lot during their lifetime, so they don't have the memorabilia that we all tend to collect. But as Linda made very clear, heritage is a really important part of your identity. And so we think these projects can give people with learning disability a greater sense of how they're part of a whole, have a value, and something can contribute. And it's also a really good way to help them incorporate with their community and feel part of their community. So, and although we don't see much representation of disabled people in history, of course they certainly existed, and their stories are very much worth exploring and telling and celebrating. And I think, again, as Linda mentioned, particularly now when we've all experienced a period of loss and trauma, I think exploring our heritage is a way to help us maybe cope and put our experiences in context, and enforce the importance of community. So, I mean, I mentioned that we had some really great heritage people who came along and helped us with our projects, and I think that's really key. They were very enthusiastic. They were very willing to understand how we work with people with learning disabilities and how they can be included. And we also found that working with local artists to find creative ways of expressing people's interests was really helped, and that brought a sort of fun element to engaging people. And the final thing I'd say that, of course, get funding. You know, it's not, maybe they're volunteering, but it's not free, and it's really important, I think, to cost out and have a clear budget for how you're going to include heritage in a health and wellbeing project.
Thank you, Jane, and you're absolutely right. The funding issue is definitely one of the top ones for all the sector to consider. So thank you so much for making that point. And now I'll ask some of my colleagues to probably pick up on some of the questions that you shared with us earlier in the chat. I see that maybe Linda managed to reply to some of them, but I can see that one of the referred question was to do with using heritage to address health inequalities and diversity. So Linda, would you like to say something about this before we move to other?
Yeah, I think, yeah, there's two. Historic England is not a curatorial body, so we don't own buildings. So what we can do is we can deliver with local partners to address local inequalities where they are identified, and the MenCap project is a brilliant example of that. We can also work strategically with minority groups to ensure that minority heritage is represented and that minority, whether they be faith groups or whatever type of protected characteristic it is, have a voice within defining what heritage is. And we have done some projects with the Stephen Lawrence Trust, for example, which are available on our website, that use enriching the list to have different voices talk about the value of the buildings to them and what they discovered about them. And I think part of that is about enabling people to have a voice. Part of it is about addressing the inherent inequality in the representation of minority groups in the kind of, if you like, the sort of national history of architecture, which is sometimes presented, often inaccurately by the press, but sometimes presented as only representing some people's heritage. And so what we're trying to do is to address that gap and always fill it with new stories. So we've been working with minority faith groups, with like I say, through the Stephen Lawrence Trust, and we've done LGBT plus and disability programs, which all of which are available on the website, which will show how we're trying to address some of those gaps in inequality of representation. I'm not sure whether that completely answers your question, but our regional offices will be working directly with communities to look at specific issues locally as well.
Thank you, Linda. And I just want to add to this that within our work with the National Academy for Social Prescribing and the Thriving Communities programs, we're also trying to make sure that in any provision, in any collaboration that we do locally with our sector partners there, we're looking to see what actually matters to the individual communities and to the people there. And in that heritage and engaging with the local history and heritage is not just necessarily only the built environment, it's everything that actually matters in terms of history and legacy to the people living there. So a lot of the Thriving Communities projects that that are part of the Thriving Communities Fund, and some of the wider collaboration projects that we're looking at supporting in regions as well, supporting communities to actually work at establishing what matters to them in those communities and in those localities. And sometimes these are, as somebody mentioned, oral history. Sometimes it's just the memories of that place. Sometimes they link in more kind of intangible way to the historic environment around them. And we just want to make sure that this is also captured as heritage and is also captured as adding to the experiences of the people in these areas when we talk about linking to your own heritage. And as you can see, Historic England and our partners are looking very much to support those more marginally represented groups, those social groups that may not have always have the same representation like others traditionally. And this is definitely one of our priorities going forward. So I'll just have a look now to some of the other questions to pick
Desi,
from.
shall I can pick up on a couple as well, if that helps.
Yes,
so one of the questions that I can see is is there any planning around lessons learned and legacies that can be shared with other communities to help with best practice and what works well? So as far as Historic England is concerned, the reason for developing a wellbeing and heritage strategy is so that we can embed all of this into the way that we work and what we need to produce for others. So we are working on a series of products that would be examples of case studies, as well as guidance for how people could use something like enriching the list in order to work with local communities and to model some of that good practice so that there is really good legacy. But I would also say that there are other existing places that you can go. So one of them is that we commissioned a report on heritage and social prescribing, which is available on our website. So if you Google Historic England, Heritage, Social Prescribing, it should come up. It was by a consultancy called SQW. And that will have some examples of projects that seem to be useful, potentially useful for social prescribing. There are also some other organisations which have developed some case studies, such as a report on wellbeing by the Heritage Alliance. And you may find some examples in there as well. And I would also recommend going to the What Works Centre for Wellbeing, They did a huge scoping study on heritage and well-being, and it is big, but in it there are loads and loads of examples of projects that were used and how they were evaluated. So there is, so we are beginning to get some of that kind of legacy material. But I think that question also relates to another one about, will there be any long-term evaluations taking place to see the impact of these programmes over the next few years? I mean, my honest answer to this is that most of the programmes that you will find on all of those resources I've just suggested will not have long-term evaluation built into them. The nature of grant systems means that people tend to be grant aided to deliver a project, not necessarily to deliver a project where you then revisit it a year later. So, and that's a perpetual problem, actually, in all sorts of types of evaluation, in all sorts of arts, culture and heritage. I think my answer to what Historic England is doing to address that is twofold. One is that Helen's project in Kirkham is spread over multiple years. It will provide one of our first opportunities to actually look at the differences that it makes to somebody's life over an extended period of time. We are also developing other projects to work with young people where we're going to use, hopefully we're seeking funding ourselves for these, but where we can use data that is provided by schools, so existing long-term data, so that our interventions can be seen within the context of what somebody else is already measuring. And sometimes that is the best way to get longitudinal data, is rather than imagine that you can go back yourself every year, but to use existing data to see whether you can see what difference it made to somebody's lives. So I hope that answers a couple of those sort of impact and case study questions.
Thank you, Linda. Yes, indeed. I can see another one here, which is how can we make heritage activities accessible to a wider population? And I just want to say that specifically when we talk about social prescribing and how we can link a wider part of the population to heritage activities via social prescribing, one of the things that we're doing with the National Academy right now is to try to link the developing regional structures of NASP with the existing health sector structures there. And my role will be in the forthcoming months to try and link provision of variety of heritage partners in regions to these structures. So basically what I'm saying is this is a work in development, but we're very excited of the opportunities that will give us, because we all know that specifically when we talk about social prescribing pathways and activities, the sharing of that data is the big issue. So what we're working on at NASP is finding the best way to feed in that data from different sectors, and that includes, of course, what we can provide from Historic England and from the wider heritage sector. And that's something which definitely we're looking to develop. But also I think Helen probably can also give us some sort of answer here, because I know that her project is looking at exactly finding one way, or at least, you know, a pattern of ways to make such activities accessible to a wider population. So I was just wondering, Helen, what is your view on that one? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I think from some of my previous experience working in the NHS, I know about recovery colleges and how they can kind of be connected to museums and cultural organisations, and also about time banking that I mentioned and the opportunity for volunteering. So I guess I would kind of advocate, kind of, as you say, looking at the pathways and that sort of ecosystem. And for example, the time banking idea, and in Lancashire, it's We Are Tempo who are exploring opportunities for that. That could be a potential to kind of expand the access, where you have members of the community that are kind of contributing and sharing their skills and time and talent. So that's that's kind of one idea to look at that. And we're just beginning to converse about how to set that up, you know, potential to set that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And besides, your idea of developing a heritage link worker in localities is something that could work extremely well, and both Historic England and some of our other partners are looking at establishing similar pilots. So we're really looking forward to see how this will pan out. And of course, in our effort to develop some sort of guidance in very near future at Historic England on social prescribing. We're also looking to provide this guidance for link workers so they know how exactly to connect people to the available heritage activities in that region. So that's definitely something that we're looking forward to be able to offer to everyone in the forthcoming future soon, hopefully.
I'm just going to pick up on that and say that partly because of that, we're really grateful for those of you that contributed to the poll, because that will help us. And secondly, there are a number of questions inevitably about funding. So just, I don't want us to run out of time before we address those to a certain extent.
Please, I was going to go next to this, so go.
Thank you. So, I mean, the National Lottery Heritage Fund does have money that you can apply to. I mean, not everybody will apply to the lottery. It depends on some organisations' ethical considerations will prevent it. But for very many people, that is a very viable, large source of money. Historic England has a very small research budget, which is an open call that you can apply to, but it wouldn't just be to do a project. It would be a project that showed us why heritage matters, or a project that was a pilot for something that could be then scaled up afterwards. So you'd need to look at our funding pages and talk to us if you were interested in applying for that from a research point of view. I mean, NASP have had their Thriving Communities programme, which has been hugely successful, and I know that they are looking forward into the future about what other funding programmes they can develop. And then there are other sort of organisations that I've not used directly, but I have had contact with, like the National Institute of Health Research. So if you were doing a project where you want someone to help pay for the evaluation of a really good project so that you can repeat it and understand the learning from it, there are some organisations like that that you might be able to apply to. And again, sometimes they have open calls and sometimes they have tailored calls.
No, that's a very good point, Linda. And actually, on NASP's website, when you look at Thriving Communities Fund, other resources, there is a webpage where all NASP sector partners have listed what funding opportunities they may have currently for supporting projects that may, be doing working on well-being or social prescribing ideas within the different sectors. And Historic England has listed everything that we're aware of currently to do with heritage. It's also a good segue probably here just to say that the next webinar that NASP is having, I think on the 6th of July, but you will see it on the website advertised later, will be specifically on funding and supporting not only Thriving Communities program organizations, but widely anyone who may be interested in progressing with a project on well-being and social prescribing. So I hope this could be useful as well. I don't know if there is any time to take another question. There isn't much time left, but I just want to thank everyone so much, our guests, and of course all of you who have taken part today in this webinar. I hope it was useful. I know that we probably didn't manage to cover everything that we wanted to. I will make sure that we will reply to as many questions as possible between us four, and I'll have a look at my inbox and try to get back to you as quickly as possible. So thank you once again. Just to remind you that if you want to go back to this recording, you can do that if you go to NASP's website and Thriving Communities program webinars. And we're looking forward to see you next time at the next NASP's webinar. Thank you once very much again, and have a lovely day. Bye.
Bye.